Hello and welcome to the Recruit Rockstars podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Hyman. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I interview a world-class expert on talent and recruiting so that you can build a company filled with rock stars. And I don't care if your business is funded by venture capitalists or private equity folks or out of your own pocket. Maybe you took a mortgage. Maybe you took two mortgages to start your business, but now you are where you are. And you're listening to this show because like a lot of leaders, you're probably wrestling with the people part of your business. And so every Tuesday and Thursday, I've got guests on this topic. Mike Schneider is one of them. Let me tell you briefly about Mike because his background's fascinating. The guy goes to Duke and then comes out, somehow goes into venture capital, which is kind of a dream job for a lot of folks. Then switches sides and says, I'm going to start a company. He starts a company called First, and we're going to talk about that in the real estate space, recently acquired by ReMax, the one and only. And Mike is still CEO of First, and we're going to talk about what that means and how he scaled it, how he built the team. With all that said, welcome to the show, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have you on. So let's start with first things first. How the heck do you come out of school and land in venture capital? That's like the dream job, right?
Yeah. Well, I've always been starting things. And there was a winding path to the venture capital, but I actually, and I counsel a lot of people coming out of college to do this. I essentially apprenticed with a CEO. I worked alongside a CEO of a company at the time called bandwidth.com. And he was actually rolling out of that to start a fund. And so I rolled out of it with him, and we actually started the fund. So the best way to get into venture capital is start your own fund, apparently.
Hitch your ride to a VC and start your own fund.
That's right. Yeah.
No,
but I think a lot of it too was, I wanted to learn from someone who I respected, who shared my values, and that was operating at kind of world-class level. And Bandwidth at the time was the fourth fastest growing company in the country, privately held company.
Wow.
And so to get to work even alongside him, it doesn't matter what the role, figure it out, but go work with great people. And that was an awesome ride there to VC.
It's advice that kids coming out of school should take a lot more.
That's right. So yeah, and then that was the fun. I loved how you said switch sides, because you got to watch, look at 700 or 800 different companies and the operating teams and the ideas and the industry. And then we backed a bunch of them, but see what was working and what wasn't before I went and started my own.
So before we go to First and starting your own, what was the focus of the venture capital fund? Were these early stage deals, any particular sector?
Yep. Seed and Series A technology companies. And that was very much a genesis of First, was looking at all these companies that were starting to build platforms from the data up, right? And focused on different verticals. So yeah, Seed and Series A software companies.
What was it you noticed, and then we'll get to First, about the people part of these startups? You look at 700-800. Are there any common themes on the employee or co-founder part of these businesses that you took mental note and said, wow, I keep seeing this movie over and over? Could be dysfunction, or it could be something that was working.
Yeah, and that's the fun of being a VC, is you get to kind of sit on boards and see how things are working over time too. So I think in retrospect, I would have even more to answer that question with now than even when we were placing those first investments. But from the very get-go, I was fascinated how much time our investment committee and all of us spent really digging in on the team. Right? Is this the right team? How does this team work? How do these founders work together?
This is before the investment, before the deal.
Before the deal, right? Yeah. That's such a big deal at Seed and Series A. It's all about the team.
Sure.
It's all about the team. And
you're betting on the jockey because the business is going to change, right?
That's right. And yeah, we want to understand if the market's big enough and if we've proven, enough of the model. But boy, it really does come down to the people.
Got it. Okay, so then you get the idea, the light bulb goes off. What was the original idea behind First? Was it pretty much what it is now, or was it something completely different and the business morphed over 5 years?
Yeah, there's some things that stayed the same. So I knew that there are really interesting opportunities in specific verticals, right, to build kind of workflow technology.
Hey, Mike, I have lost you. Can you hear me? Technology.
So one thing that stayed the same was it was very clear that the next wave of technology focused on specific industries where there's a specific workflow we could get into.
Yep.
And I always wanted to be solving a number one or number two pain point for my user, because otherwise you're just a footnote. If you want to build a big business, it's got to be something they're coming to the office worried about every day.
Yep.
So I met with over 100 real estate agents before we started first.
How did you pick real estate? What, did you have background in that business or?
So yeah, I had always loved the asset class. So I had some rental properties and things, and through that had gotten to know some real estate agents. So I knew it was a big enough space.
Yeah.
I knew some of the day-to-day problems, but I sat down with over 100 real estate agents before we started first, just to understand what their pain points were before I talked about any solutions.
Yep.
And all of them talked about how inefficient the lead side or where their business came from was. So I knew we had a number one pain point. And so
by business, just so I'm clear, do you mean for listings or buyers or either?
All of the above, but where is my next deal coming from? Because most of their business was coming from their relational network, but they didn't really have a way to drive that or improve that, and leads on the other side were very inefficient and very expensive.
Okay, so that was
all that held true. Knew it was a big opportunity. We then built a little prototype and put together a transition plan with the fund to step out and start it.
Got it. So you get out, you start this thing, scared to death, I'm sure. And what was the first thing you kind of did around the people part? Did you get co-founders? Did you try to raise some money? Did you hire anybody? What were you banging on keyboard yourself to design code? What was it?
Yeah, great question. So I attribute a lot of our success to having a great co-founder from the outset, who is a technical co-founder and also a great teacher. I went from not really knowing how technology worked to, I think, being able to lead an effective product organization that's kind of pushing the envelope on building great technology. And we've built a world-class technology and product organization. And a lot of that is because he spent the time to teach me how the internet works and how software is developed and how you should think about some of these things. So having a great co-founder that had a completely different experience, and I could walk through kind of the business model, what we're changing and how we're helping these independent sales agents with their day-to-day, that was really, really important early on.
This co-founder, did not come from real estate, I assume.
He did not. He'd been in software development all his life.
A lot of listeners are single founders or looking for a co-founder. How do you find a co-founder? It seems like such an intimate relationship, like dating. Like, how do you find that person?
Oh man, it's very, very, very hard. Very, very, very hard. And it's also very hard if you have to part ways. We end up having to part ways. So you talk about war stories. So yeah, I think that it was incredibly critical at the early stages. And there was a time where the business needs and roles and new leadership teams forming meant we had to separate. And that is just as hard as, to your point, how intimate that relationship is.
It's like a divorce, right?
It was one of the hardest things I've done in business.
Wow. Still talk today?
We do.
Wow.
Yeah, we're working on getting our ski trip here. We'll see. We'll see how, I think he's also one of the most humble and supportive guys that I know. And we really, really respect him. So yeah, it's tough.
Got it.
It's tough. I'd say your founding team really, really, really matters, right? Getting that right. But whether they're all founders, I think that's all always up in the air.
Yeah. When you say founding team, what was the first group of hires that you kind of said, okay, if I get this right, we have a chance. And if I don't get these folks right, we're screwed. Was it your first X people?
Yeah, that's something I do really differently the next time, candidly. We kind of dripped and drabbed capital into the company. Mm-hmm. And so it was always this trade-off of, do we go hire this great person, right? Or do we just kind of fill a role? Yep. And until we can hire that great person from a revenue standpoint or other things. And I think if I was to start over again, especially if you're going the venture back route, I would do slightly bigger rounds, and I would really be thoughtful about getting phenomenal people who can lead those functions earlier. So if you're sitting as a founder thinking about it, do a bigger round, be really thoughtful about the organization, and get your leadership team at least those key functions in place.
How many rounds did you do along the way?
So we ended up doing 2 seed rounds and then a Series A. And then we were working towards our Series B, and we got some great offers we couldn't refuse. So we ended up on the acquisition path.
Great. Which we'll get to in a bit. So you did basically 3 rounds. Yep. He raised what, millions of dollars, I'm guessing?
Yeah, over 10 million, between 10 and 11.
Not bad. Little seed round of 10 million will carry you for a while, right?
That's right.
But to your point, how do you win the war for talent if you can't hire the right people because you can afford them? Now, this is in Raleigh-Durham, not a cheap place to be. Significant war for talent, especially technology talent, as I understand. What was your recruiting strategy? How did you go about finding people to join this company that no one had ever heard of before? No one even knew what it did, yet you had to get people.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I'm actually pretty good at. So some of it is, do you have a big enough vision and problem? And do you have something that, that you do have the backing to go and really take a big swing at? I think those are important for key leadership hires. And then do you have the makings of an interesting culture? I think that hire number one, that hire number two are incredibly, incredibly important, because the culture of that you're laying, the foundations you're laying there, it's either going to be a positive reinforcing upward cycle, or the old adage hangs true: B players hire C players, and you can kind of go in the other direction. So I think the other thing we did very effectively in order to hire the A players in key roles was that we had a remote dev culture and data science culture, so that we could bring in Rockstars who were very well known in the development community, whether they're sitting in Dallas or Portland or San Francisco, pretty much all US based, but we did that intentionally, knowing that we wanted to be able to hire the very best people in those roles.
So that was a intentional decision from the beginning, or that was a change after you realized you just couldn't find them locally?
That was an intentional decision from the beginning, and enabled us to get at some great senior people up front. I think you have to decide if you're going to be remote friendly from the start and either build the culture that way or not. I think that's really, really important.
Give an example of the trade-off, or what a remote culture looks like that is different or unique, so the listener can say, yeah, I don't want that kind of culture, or maybe I do.
Yeah, I think it's amazing how many little things go into building a remote friendly culture. It's things like when you have a meeting, there is a Zoom link and a video, and everybody in the meeting turns on their video. Even if rather than you peering in on this room where you don't get a lot of senses, you can actually still see everyone's face. It's those types of little things that I wouldn't have known at the outset, but that our remote teams put together. One of our VP of engineering actually gets flown all over the world. Zendesk flew him to Australia to come talk about leading remote engineering cultures, because he's done that at Living Social and others with hundreds of engineers. So I think there are a lot of best practices out there. Study up, listen, learn. There are significant trade-offs, but there are also huge benefits. We can hire someone and they're live and working from day one, and really appreciate the flexibility of that.
What's a downside or a trade-off that you never cracked, and to this day it really was frustrating or held you back in some way?
I think that if I had unlimited resources, which you never do, I'd schedule more in-person time as a team.
To fly everyone in?
Just fly everyone in, whether that's to headquarters or you rotate quarterly to different locations, but you really can't trade off the bonds that are built outside of work hours and even just working in the same place. And you got to get on a regular cadence so that people feel like they're all part of that.
Over the 5 years, how many times do you recall doing it?
We probably averaged once a year, and it could have been 2 to 4 times a year, I think, to be really productive.
Big check to write, but it has huge benefits. Like you said, the universal lubricant of wine does a host of good, right?
That's right. That's right.
So as the business scales, one of the things the listeners wrestle with a ton, and I have wrestled with this, is when the business outgrows some of the people in all kinds of roles, at all kinds of levels. How often did that happen over the 5 years? Would you say the business became a different company twice or every year, or walk us through that, and how do you handle that kind of change?
Yeah. So I think that at times it was changing every 6 months pretty significantly, and certainly in certain roles, right? And that could mean you're hiring someone more senior over someone else. So I think that it depends on how fast you're scaling and how different people are scaling as well. But I think that what we're really talking about is the kind of role and competence fit, and also desire. I oftentimes is selling hires on the fact that being in a startup is such a great opportunity because you can grow in so many different ways, because there are so many jobs you can either learn or take on or expand your skill sets. And I remember one guy sitting across from me at lunch saying, I'm just not that guy. Right. And that's okay.
He
Like
knew
for
it.
people,
He had the
he knew,
self-awareness.
he had the self-awareness to know I'm great at this. That's
Yeah.
all I want to do. And to the extent that that's what's needed, great. And I appreciate that. Because there are people that are going to grab on for all that it's worth and
Yep.
learn and take on more and more and more responsibility, and some people aren't. And you always have to keep a pulse on, is it the right fit with the need for the business today,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And do they have the desire to continue on the path for what we're going to need 6 months from now? Because if they're not, it's going to be different.
You got to skate
And
where the puck's going to be when you're growing at that kind of rate.
that's
Without
right.
going to specific numbers, how fast was the business growing? Was it like doubling every year or growing 50%
Yeah, that's
every year?
pretty fair. Sometimes faster, sometimes slower,
Right.
and not always in headcount, right? Oftentimes, certain parts of the business are growing at faster rates, and headcount is staying fairly flat.
Right.
So I think that's where you're always trying to. But if I were to pass on one learning to the listener that is in the throes of how do I run this company when revenues just went down 2 months, or I'm struggling with this role, or I'm trying to figure out how to scale this part where now I'm hearing we have all this tech debt piling up or whatever it is. I think that if you diagnose that the problem really is is not a good fit in a certain person and role, you can't act fast enough.
How fast well, let me rephrase it. Over this time building the company, how long does it take before you made a poor selection?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I sometimes beat myself up when finally, if I look at the people that we let go, I think my average was probably feeling like I was 4 to 6 months too late on all of them.
Really? So you knew after a month, 3 months?
I don't know I think that how soon I knew was more of a challenge, but how long I then let it try
Mm,
to figure out how to, whether it was
yeah.
right, fit them into a different role, or whether it was motivational, or whether it was that this is there are so many different ways you try to either justify or solve the problem
Yeah.
rather than just pulling the cord. And
Yeah.
I think so much time is lost, and generally the team appreciates. I think again the most there is nothing that has a bigger impact on the trajectory of your business than who you're hiring and who you're firing, and
Yeah.
what messages those send. So I would act much faster on the firing, and be very very thoughtful on the hiring.
When you think about the biggest hiring mistake or mess up that you ever made, and we don't have to name names, what was it that you missed that had you seen or identified before you hired them might have tipped you off that you were about to make a mistake? I'm sure you do a post-mortem and you're like racking your brains and, oh my God, what was I thinking? Can you tell us what you learned from that?
Yeah, I think that I love one of the reasons I like starting companies is that it gives people the opportunity to really grow exponentially in their careers. And so that's a risky business, right? Some people are going to grow and some people aren't.
Right.
And I think when you're hiring for leadership, if I were to diagnose a few of the mistakes, I think that if they haven't done it before, you really can't count on it,
Right.
right? And so
So the
that was, I
first
think,
time as a manager, first sales rep becoming their first time sales manager, software
right.
developer becoming a team leader of a development team, that kind of thing.
Yes, or I've owned this part of this function and now I want to expand, et
Yeah.
cetera. And I think if you're looking for someone who's going to lead, they need to have done it. And the only way you're going to know that is really, really dig in. And I found one of the best ways to do that is with reference calls and be really specific about those things. So I think if you think about the biggest mistake I probably made, it was where reference calls verified this person was great at what I do. They were great at.
Yeah.
Could they do any of those other things? Was a complete unknown.
Right.
Right? You give them the shot, and it turns out they couldn't or didn't understand it and couldn't implement around that. But I knew all of that, right? But I was trying to give that opportunity, and I'd say I wouldn't go for that again.
Yeah.
Find someone who's done it. Find someone who's done it.
So you're an optimist. It seems like, and as a relatively young guy, you've had an amazing career trajectory already. So you figure I'll pass it forward, give people a shot, be the nice guy. They come in, they fail at that. I think what I hear you saying is there's a place for that in scaling a business, but especially crucial positions when time is not on your side, picking more of a proven leader, especially the people leadership. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think if they're going to come in to own any function, I think that's really, really important, right? It's different than the person who comes in to play this role and might then grow into something else,
Yeah.
right? But for someone that you're looking for in a leadership role early on in a startup, that you have to wear many hats,
Yeah.
right? And so if they haven't worn many of those hats or some of those hats, that's a real red flag.
Got it. I want to shift gears one last time before we wrap up, and that is the sale. Congratulations to
Thank you.
ReMax, right? Unbelievable. And you implied earlier you had multiple offers, hopefully a huge bidding war. Um, what change does it make to the company, to the culture, to the people, the day you say, hey guys, I got some big news to tell you? I know there's a lot of great, high fives and people feel like, wow, that's big. What challenges does it introduce, or are there people that weren't that excited about it? How did you kind of manage through that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I started comparing notes with other founders who had sold, right? And I think we did something maybe a little countercultural on this front that I think I would do over again. And some people are staunchly opposed to how I went about this. But our culture was one of pretty radical transparency. So as I told the board, right after we told the board that we were going to pursue this, I told the team, which is pretty risky.
This
When
was
we were
before
kicking
the
off
deal.
the process, when we were
Before the
kicking
deal.
off the process because we had interest,
Wow.
that we were exploring a sale as a strategic way to grow this company and
You
achieve the
told
mission
everybody in
overall.
the company.
I told everyone in the company.
Wow, that's transparent, but also pretty risky.
It was very risky, and I think I'd say I'd do it over again if you have a culture of transparency,
Yeah.
right? But I think that also don't take it lightly, right? If it wasn't, because I think that once people start getting in the mindset of this is kind of where we're going and why and what the benefits may or may not be for certain team members, et cetera, there's a lot to manage there. But I'd rather be managing that together as a team and helping understand, them to understand our thought process than have it happen in a back room and people are always asking questions.
I'm curious about that decision. A lot of founders, co-founders will bring their senior team into the loop because they got to do management presentations, that kind of thing. What did you think that the junior folks would do with that information, right? There's not much they can do on a day-to-day basis that would change their life other than worry, am I going to have a job? So I understand the transparency. I applaud that. Were you worried they might find out from some other way or some other back channel source, or why everybody versus just kind of the leadership team?
Yeah, for us, it's really about making sure everyone's aligned and focused on what's most important. And so in this scenario, it's probably not the same in all scenarios, right? If we were selling to a PE group that was looking to cut half the headcount, et
Yeah,
cetera.
that's a little
But
different. Yeah.
in this scenario, we're talking to strategics. This is an alternate path to get to the scale and have the impact we want to have on the industry.
Yep.
Rather than raising a Series B round and all that. And the fun part was our objectives for the team really didn't change. So the message was, look, we have to do the exact same things. We got to hit our sales numbers. We need to, right? We need to continue to build this product. We're seeing engagement going through the roof. Let's continue tripling down on that. But these companies are really interested in not just our product, but our team and building and scaling this up. And this is a faster path in many ways to get to tens of thousands, 100,000 users. And that got our team excited about it. But you also have to manage the expectation. It might not be a huge windfall for everyone, right? Like how do we think about this? But I think that, in going through that, it was a 4 to 5 month, ended up being 4 to 5 months of emotions we had to manage together.
Right.
But I think everybody, we haven't lost a single person on the other side.
That's incredible.
We did let some people go on sales and marketing, which was just part of the process, but we took great care of them. And that was the other part. Nobody had something happen on a Friday that they were given a severance check on a Monday and felt that they were screwed, right? Everybody kind of knew what was coming. We gave the people that we let go 3 months severance. It was a great deal for everyone around involved. So I think if you're on that upward path, I think it builds a lot of trust. And now I think people are going to be happier on the other side.
It's also a really good reminder, Mike, that people can handle more change and adversity than maybe we give them credit for if you treat them like adults, right? A lot of times I think we underestimate people's wherewithal to handle change and information. So
Yep. That's one of my tightly held beliefs so that people are awesome and that they'll rise to the occasion. And we want to create a culture where people can do their best work of their career. And so, if things are going to change and there's going to be dramatic change, I think everybody needs to prepare for that.
Well, Mike, I give you a ton of credit. You go from being a VC to starting this thing, finding a founder, changing leadership. You scale this thing. You sell the company. Congratulations. I guess we're going to find you as part of ReMax now, right? If we need to look
That's
you up.
right.
How can
Yep.
people get in touch or learn more about First?
Sure. So we're First HQ on most of the socials, and you can find me there too. But always happy to jump on and talk to other founders or people that are wrestling with things. I know this is the hardest and most important part of the business. It's the people stuff.
It really is.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it, Mike. Thanks for making the time.